Relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Earlier this month, unbeaten up-and-comer of Canada, Bree Howling, was in action against Matilde Brailer
at the Lighthouse Center in Halifax.
She won a points decision against Matilde. Good offensive highlights, defensive highlights, good mid-range to inside work from the unbeaten up-and-comer, the unbeaten Canadian.
Said it before and I'll say it again. In spite of Bree Howling only having a handful of fights, less than a handful of fights, she has the look of a more experienced fighter, a more experienced pugilist than she actually is.
Sporting a professional record of 4 wins, no losses, and no draws, no recorded knockouts, not yet. Bree Howling is one of the more promising unbeaten up-and-comers anywhere at or around these weights, campaigning at Super Bantamweight.
Super Bantamweight, that's 122 pounds. That's where Mayerling Rivas holds the WBA title.
Jamie Mercado's got the WBC, Siegeling Lafarve, she's got the WBO, and Shernika Johnson,
she's got the IBF.
This is where unbeaten up-and-comer Ellie Scottney campaigns. This is where Nazarena Romero campaigns, and as stated, this is one of the more talent-rich divisions anywhere in the sport of boxing. That pocket, that talent pool between 118 and 126 pounds from bantamweight, super bantamweight, up to featherweight.
It's a lot of fucking talent. It's only getting deeper.
Bree Howling is very much a part of that talent pool. The only drawback, the only downside to all of this is that Bree Howling was not able to be a bit more active this year. She's been averaging 1 fight a year for the last 4 years or so. She debuted as a professional in 2019, and since then, she's only been able to get in 1 fight a year for the last 4 years. She recently paired up with Probellum.
Ideally, when you're talking about an unbeaten up-and-comer in the early stages of their career, it's not unusual to see the fighter fighting 3 to 4, maybe even 5 times a year to get those rounds in the bank and garner that professional experience.
Something akin to what you see with Matchroom's own Sky Nicholson. Just so happens that Bree Howling, some months ago, she was actually in the running for a fight with Sky Nicholson. She was actually in the running for a fight with Ramla Ali as well. Needless to say, those fights didn't materialize, but
at minimum, the whole year didn't go to waste. Bree Howling did get to bank 6 rounds opposite the ring Matilde Brailer
and won a majority decision. I can only hope that the following year will be a more productive year for young Bree Howling.
That's the silver lining, that Bree Howling is actually very young. She's only 24 years old. She has many, many good years ahead of her. So even though she has some lost time to make up for, she has time to do it.
Curious as to whether or not this show that took place at the Lighthouse Arts Center in Halifax was in fact a Probellum show, as Bree Howling did join forces with them earlier this year, but I don't get the sense.
I don't know if that was a Probellum show. If it wasn't, and Bree Howling...
If that partnership ended before it ever got off the ground, if it ended before it even started, there are at least 1 or 2 very good outfits in Canada that Bree Howling should and could join forces with. Eye of the Tiger Management, that promotes Christian Mabili and Mary Spencer.
It's a very well-to-do outfit. Yvonne Michelle, Group Yvonne Michelle. Jim, that's another good outfit based out of Canada.
Yvonne Michelle, who promotes fighters like Kim Clavel and Marie-Eve Dicaire, Marie-Pierre Huel.
Reigning WBC Bridgerweight champion Oscar Rivas.
If by some chance Bree Howling is a network and promotional free agent, if that partnership with Probellum ended before it even started, these are 2 outfits based out of Canada that...
2 very well-to-do outfits that should pick up Bree Howling, because she's a talented young fighter, and she needs the promotion, she needs the push, needs the exposure. She's got it.
Not everybody does. That it factor, that indefinable quality that you see in a fighter that could end up going all the way so long as they're brought along properly. She just needs the platform in order to showcase her skills and put them on full display. So hopefully next year will be a more productive year, a busier year for young Bree Howling. And congratulations to her for advancing to a professional record of 4 wins, no losses, and no draws. In men's welterweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now that Errol Spence Jr. versus Keith Thurman title fight has been approved by the WBA. They're essentially giving Errol the green light to take on his WBC mandatory challenger instead of
Eimantas Stanionis, who is his WBA mandatory challenger.
The World Boxing Association has confirmed that their organization has approved a request for Errol Spence to make a world title defense against former unified champion Keith Thurman in the month of February. On November 14th, 2022, TGB Promotions applied for special permission on behalf of Spence to fight Thurman in February of 2023, but with specific mandatory conditions pursuant to the WBA's Rule
C-16, which states that the mandatory defense periods can be modified for cause either by special permission request or on its own initiative.
WBA decided that Spence can face Thurman, the WBA stated.
Well, that's confirmation. The cat is officially out of the proverbial bag.
Spence, who holds the WBC, WBA, and IBF titles at 147 pounds, was recently ordered by the World Boxing Council to make a mandatory defense against Thurman.
Boy, they really fucked over Eimantas Stanionis, didn't they?
You're telling me. He was officially named the WBA's mandatory challenger last year, and he was actually ordered to face then-champion Yordenis Ugas.
What that essentially means is he was already in position to fight for an alphabet title before Keith Thurman even made his comeback this year.
Earlier this year, in February, I believe it was, that's when Keith Thurman took on Mario Barrios in what was a WBC eliminator.
Eimantas Stanionis was already in position before that, well before that, by way of the WBA, and the powers that be have deemed it so fit to screw him over.
Additionally, the sanctioning body recently ordered WBA regular welterweight champion Eimantas Stanionis to make a mandatory defense against Virgil Ortiz. Ortiz defeated Michael McKinson in a WBA eliminator on August 8th. The winner of the bout, or Stanionis, if it ends in a draw, will face the winner of Spence versus Thurman within 180 days of their bouts. The winners of these bouts will square off in the near future to determine the Pioneer body's sole 147-pound champion, the WBA added. The winner of Spence versus Thurman.
This is chicanery. Pure chicanery.
Unadulterated chicanery is what it is, because there's no real reason for Keith Thurman to get to skip ahead in the line, skip ahead in the queue, past Eimantas Stanionis, past Jaron Boots Ennis.
They're almost rewarding this guy for being one of the most inactive fighters in the welterweight division today. In the last close to 3 years, Keith Thurman has only fought once, and it wasn't against the top contender either.
It's ridiculous, but that's what's going on. Here we have confirmation that in the first quarter of next year, Errol Spence Jr. will in fact be fighting Keith Thurman.
And if he wins, he's supposed to fight Eimantas Stanionis afterwards, which probably doesn't mean much to Eimantas Stanionis, since based on the initial agreement, he was supposed to be fighting him next.
That was the deal. When the WBA initially ordered Yordenis Ugas, the then WBA welterweight champion, to fight Eimantas Stanionis, they got Eimantas to step aside on the premise that he would get to fight the winner of Spence versus Ugas. That was a year ago.
As a result of that, Eimantas Stanionis ended up opposite the ring, a live one, in Radzav Butaev, and he managed to secure the W. He managed to secure the decision, but he only fought once this whole year. This entire thing with Spence is stifling his career.
Now look, they're ordering him to fight Virgil Ortiz instead of prioritizing the title shot he was supposed to have already gotten. As a boxing fan, I love the idea of Ortiz versus Stanionis, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't notice they're screwing this guy over.
If the fight between him and Virgil ends up happening, he ends up opposite the ring, that guy, he might lose that fight and thereby lose his title shot.
Oh yeah, as a boxing fan, I admit, it's a great fight and I'd love to see it, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't feel this guy's getting screwed over.
Oh no, he's getting screwed over, man. He's getting fucked.
By his own people, I suspect. Eimantas Stanionis is a pro-bellum fighter. Pro-bellum, which is helmed by Richard Schaefer. Richard Schaefer, who's long had a working relationship with Al Heyman and his PBC. Lest we forget, it was Richard Schaefer who helped Al Heyman funnel all those fighters from Golden Boy Promotion
over to Al Heyman's PBC, what eventually became Al Heyman's PBC. Sean Porter, Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Deontay Wilder,
Adrian Broner. You know the names. You know the stable. It was Richard Schaefer who helped make that happen.
So when you think about that, you think about how Richard Schaefer is at the helm of Pro Bellum, and Eamon Stanionis is a Pro Bellum fighter, and you think about Richard's relationship with Al, what you have to ask yourself is, do you really think that Richard Schaefer is fighting hard to get his fighter a title shot?
Is that what he's doing? Or is he doing his old buddy a favor so that his prize stallion at welterweight, Errol Spence Jr., can fight some fucking has-been?
Yeah, maybe Keith Thurman was a unified champion once. Maybe there was a time when he was one of the top welterweights in the division, but that's not what he is here today. Not on the schedule he's on, not losing to a 40-year-old Manny Pacquiao, and not going the distance with Mario Barrios.
You beat a 140-pound fighter coming off a knockout loss at 140. You fight him at 147 over 12 rounds, and that gets you a title shot.
Guy's a fucking has-been.
He's a has-been. He might only have one professional loss, but there's more to boxing than what you see on paper, and today's Keith Thurman is a fucking has-been.
They fucked Eamon Stanionis, man. They really fucked this guy, man.
They fucked him.
Now, his title shot is being put on a back burner for the second time, and he's being ordered to fight an even more dangerous guy than the last guy that he fought.
There's an ugly side to this business that the boxing fans aren't always privy to. While we might enjoy the idea of Eamon Stanionis versus Virgil Ortiz, there's foul play at work here. There is chicanery. Keith Thurman doesn't deserve a title shot, I'm sorry to say. I understand the mandatory process, but it's not without its...
Look, the WBA fucked Eamon Stanionis, Richard Schaefer fucked Eamon Stanionis,
Keith Thurman, Errol Spence, and Al Heyman.
Al wants to put Errol in there with a quasi-retired fighter. If Keith Thurman fights Errol in February of next year, it will have been a full year's time since Keith's last fight. He wants him fighting in safe fights. That's a safe fight.
Don't start talking to me about what Keith Thurman did in 2016 or 2017 or whatever it was, because it ain't 2016 or 2017. It's 2022, and this fucking guy is a has-been.
When's the last time he beat a solid welterweight?
This guy don't beat nobody with a pulse at 147 pounds, and that's why Al Heyman moved heaven and earth to make this fight instead of the Stanionis fight.
And it's as simple as that.
Finally, in men's super middleweight news, ahead of his fight this weekend with Zach Parker, John Ryder says, if I beat Zach Parker, I deserve a Canelo shot. I've paid my dues.
And in this sport, the word deserve can sometimes seem like a four-letter word.
Sometimes. I think it makes perfect sense, really, Ryder explained. The winner will be in line for the WBO title. Obviously, it's for the interim. And I know David Benavidez and Caleb Plant are fighting a final eliminator, and Canelo's got options. But I've spent 2 years chasing him, Canelo, around the world, trying to be a backup fighter. If someone drops out, and if I beat Zach Parker next week, I deserve my shot at Canelo, and I think I've paid my dues. Following him around the world to see if someone would pull out or fall ill obviously wasn't the way to go about it, and I deserve a proper camp and a proper notice, and I'd love to get it on with Canelo for sure.
I guess the saving grace and silver lining for John is that if he wins, I actually think he will get the Canelo fight.
If he wins, I do. The problem is, I don't think he's going to win this weekend. I think Zach is going to stop him.
I suppose Parker's looking at this as his breakout fight and seeing if he can do a number on me.
And it propels him on and opens doors for him. But I don't feel like I'm an opponent just yet, Ryder continued. I feel I have a lot to give in this sport, and at 168, I feel like I'm a different animal to my days at 160. They are well behind me. I can really perform at this weight, and this is where I'm going to do the things I set out to do in this sport. Ryder does understand, however, that things are not supposed to go his way next week. He's promoted by Matchroom, and often on DAZN shows.
But this is a Frank Warren bill on BT Sport.
Obviously, a lot has been made of it being on a Warren show and bridging the gap between Warren and Matchroom. But I think when the fight is right and the terms can be agreed, why shouldn't they be, Ryder asked. You've got to be an away fighter sometimes. And I've been an away fighter before. I've been an away fighter on Matchroom shows. So it's not the be-all and end-all of being a home fighter. But it's a great opportunity, and I think it's the right fight and the right time for me. There's other fights I could have taken, but you can't really pass up these opportunities, and it could be worse. Ryder is the local lad. Parker is the visitor, even if only geographically.
John Ryder is a rough and tumble, mid-range to inside guy, a physical guy that tries to crowd his opponent. But the same is true of Zach Parker. He's just bigger.
And younger. That's exactly it, Ryder added. I'm an away fighter on a show in London against a man from Derby, so it's not that bad, is it? Does he think there's a chance his fan base matches Parker's on the night? I hope so. It's not been ideal with Matchroom having a show on the same night at Wembley featuring Dillian White, but I think I'll still have a good crowd to support me, as will Zach. But there's a good couple of ticket sellers on the show as well, so I'm sure it will be a nice vibe in the arena.
For those of you that haven't realized it yet, this upcoming weekend is going to be a very busy weekend in the sport of boxing. There's White versus Franklin,
Parker versus Ryder, and Prograis versus Zepeda here stateside.
Those are all really good shows, by the way. Really good shows, really good main events.
There is no animosity between the fighters, even if they are from separate camps. The only time they have met was at the press conference when the fight was announced. He doesn't lack confidence. He's obviously a bit taller than I am, but so are most people I box, Ryder continued. He will see it as an advantage. I see it as a disadvantage for Parker. I tend to struggle when they are a bit shorter, so I'm looking forward to it.
For a taller, longer fighter who's trying to manage the distance against John Ryder behind straight punches, behind a stiff stick, a stiff jab, he could pose a lot of problems.
Because he's a shorter guy, a smaller target with a lower center of gravity that can navigate under and or around those straight punches from the outside coming in. That's for a taller, longer fighter that's trying to fight at a safe distance, long distance, but that's not Zach Parker. While he is taller and longer, he's a mid-range to inside fighter, the same as John.
It's not the same dichotomy as the Callum Smith fight. A lot of people feel John Ryder unofficially beat Callum Smith, but Callum's best punches are his straight punches when he can get his whole arm out there.
Zach Parker's best punches are his bent arm punches, his hooks, his body shots.
So even if he is taller than John and longer than John, he's not going to feel out of place. He's not going to feel uncomfortable mid-range to inside, working in the pocket. That's his sweet spot.
I don't have a rooting interest in one fighter over the other. I ain't got a horse in the race. I'm just saying, outside looking in, this looks like a big train, little train situation.
Usually that favors the bigger train because John Ryder may end up having a hell of a hard time trying to outmuscle the bigger, musclier guy.
So, I've got Zach Parker winning this fight by way of knockout.